The rifle's hammer clicked in the darkness. "Step outside, Coulter. We know she's in there." Wade Coulter pressed his back against the cabin wall, his Winchester steady in his hands. Outside, 5 armed men surrounded his mountain ranch, their torches burning orange against the midnight sky. Behind him, Mara Bennett crouched near the stone fireplace, her face pale but her jaw set tight. The saddlebag clutched to her chest contained secrets powerful enough to destroy empires, and men willing to kill for them had finally found her hiding place. If you want to see how a woman no one wanted became the most dangerous person on the frontier, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The mountains didn't forgive mistakes. Wade Coulter learned that truth the hard way during his first winter on Black Ridge, when a collapsed trail nearly killed him and his horse both. He'd spent 3 days digging through snow and rock with frozen hands, surviving on pine bark and melted ice, before finally clawing his way back to the cabin he'd built with his own bleeding knuckles. That was 5 winters ago. Now he knew every dangerous creek crossing, every wolf den, every section of trail that turned to mud-slick death after spring rains. He knew which caves offered shelter and which ones filled with rattlesnakes come summer. He knew the mountains' moods better than he'd ever known any person. People disappointed you. Mountains just killed you clean. His ranch sat at the highest point anyone bothered to live, a rough clearing hacked out of pine forest with a log cabin, a patched-together barn, and grazing land that froze solid half the year. The cattle he raised were tough, rangy things that could survive on scrub grass and attitude, just like him. Wade didn't go to town unless he needed supplies he couldn't make or grow himself. When he did ride down to Ash Hollow, he kept his hat low, bought what he needed, and left before anyone could start a conversation. The locals had learned to leave him alone, exactly how he wanted it. On a Tuesday afternoon in late July, Wade was replacing rotted fence posts on the south pasture when he heard hoofbeats coming up the mountain road. He straightened slowly, wiping sweat from his forehead with a dusty sleeve. Nobody came up here. The trail was too steep, too rocky, too much work for a social call. Occasionally a lost hunter or a desperate prospector would wander onto his land, but they always turned back once they realized how far they'd climbed. Wade walked to the fence line and waited. The rider came into view 5 minutes later, a single horse picking its way carefully over the broken stone trail. Wade's eyes narrowed. The horse was loaded heavy, moving slow. Whoever was riding had come a distance. As the rider got closer, Wade felt his jaw tighten. It was a woman, young, from the look of her. She rode awkwardly, like someone who'd learned out of necessity rather than pleasure. Her dress was faded brown, covered in trail dust, and her dark hair hung in a messy braid down her back. Even from 30 yards away, Wade could see the exhaustion pulling at her shoulders. She was also heavy-set, the kind of build that drew stares and whispers in frontier towns, where skinny meant struggling and curves meant you were eating more than your share. Wade had seen how people treated women who didn't fit their narrow ideas of proper. The woman reined her horse to a stop 20 feet from where Wade stood. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Her face was sun-darkened and dust-streaked, but her eyes were sharp, wary. She looked at Wade the way someone looks at a door they're not sure will open. "You Wade Coulter?" she asked. Her voice was hoarse, probably from trail dust. "That's right. You still need a cook?" Wade blinked. "What?" The woman reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a wrinkled piece of paper. She held it up. "You posted a notice in Ash Hollow 6 months back. Said you needed someone to cook and keep house. I'm here for the job." Wade stared at her. 6 months ago, he'd been drunk and lonely enough to think hiring help was a good idea. He'd scrawled out a notice and nailed it to the board outside the supply store, then regretted it the moment he sobered up. He'd assumed nobody would be desperate enough to ride up a mountain for a job cooking for one ornery bastard. He'd been wrong. "That notice is old," Wade said carefully. "Probably fell off the board by now. It's still there. I saw it 3 days ago." "Lady, I don't—" "My name's Mara Bennett." She swung down from her horse with the graceless determination of someone who'd been riding too long. Her boots hit the ground hard. "I can cook anything you've got ingredients for. I can clean, mend, garden, preserve food for winter, butcher if you need it. I've worked lumber camps, cattle drives, wagon trains. I'm not afraid of hard work." Wade rubbed the back of his neck. This isn't a lumber camp. This is a mountain. Winter up here will kill you if you don't know what you're doing. Then teach me. Mara's chin came up. I learn fast. Why would you want to live up here? There's nothing but work and cold and... Because nobody's up here to bother me. Mara's voice went flat, hard. Because I'm tired of working my back raw in town kitchens while people make jokes about whether I'm eating the profits. I'm tired of sleeping in barn lofts and getting run off when the foreman's wife decides I'm too ugly or too fat or too whatever to be around decent folk. I need work. You need help. That's the arrangement. Wade studied her. Her hands were rough, nails broken short. Her dress had been mended in a dozen places. The horse she rode was old, sway-backed, probably bought cheap because nobody else wanted it. She wasn't lying about working hard. I can't pay much, Wade said finally. I don't need much. Just food, a place to sleep, and enough wages to save for when I'm too old to work anymore. The cabin's small. You'd sleep in the loft. Fine. Winter starts early up here. By October, you'll be snowed in until March. I've survived worse. Wade looked at her for a long moment. Every instinct told him to send her away. He didn't need company. He didn't want conversation. He'd built this life specifically to avoid people. But the cabin was a mess. His cooking was barely edible. And something about the way Mara stood there, exhausted, desperate, but refusing to beg, reminded him of himself 6 years ago when he'd first climbed this mountain with nothing but anger and a need to disappear. 1 month trial, Wade said. If it doesn't work out, I'll pay your way back down to town and give you enough for a week's lodging while you find something else. Mara's shoulders dropped half an inch. Relief, quickly hidden. Deal, she said. She extended her hand. Wade shook it. Her grip was firm, calloused. Barn's over there, Wade said, nodding toward the weathered structure. Get your horse settled. I'll show you the cabin. Mara led her horse toward the barn without another word. Wade watched her go, then shook his head and went back to replacing fence posts. He'd probably just made a mistake. She'd last maybe 2 weeks before the isolation or the work or the sheer brutality of mountain life sent her running back down the trail. He gave her until August. He was wrong about that, too. Tut. That first night, Mara cooked dinner. Wade had been surviving on burned bacon, hard bread, and whatever game he managed to shoot. His idea of cooking was throwing meat in a pan until it stopped bleeding. Mara took one look at his kitchen, if you could call it that, and got to work. She found flour, salt, some questionable potatoes, and a few strips of salted pork Wade had been ignoring. 40 minutes later, she set a plate in front of him that actually looked like food. Biscuits, fried potatoes with onions, pork that wasn't charred black. Wade ate in silence. It was the best meal he'd had in 6 years. "Where'd you learn to cook like this?" he asked, sopping up the last of the grease with a biscuit. "My mother." Mara was washing dishes in a bucket of heated water. "She ran a boarding house in Missouri before she died. I was cooking for 12 people by the time I was 10. "That why you took up cooking work?" Mara's hands paused in the water. "Wasn't a lot of other options. I'm not pretty enough to work in a hotel front room, not small enough to be a seamstress, not educated enough to teach school. Cooking was the one thing I could do that people needed." Wade heard the bitterness in her voice. "You're good at it," he said. Mara glanced at him, surprised. Then she went back to washing dishes. They didn't talk much after that. Wade wasn't used to conversation, and Mara didn't seem to need it. She cleaned the kitchen, swept the floor, and then climbed the ladder to the loft where Wade had set up a straw mattress and some blankets. Wade sat by the fire for another hour, listening to the wind outside and the quiet sounds of someone else living in his space. It felt strange. Not bad, just strange. Bad. The first week passed in a rhythm Wade hadn't expected. Mara rose before dawn and had coffee ready by the time Wade came downstairs. She cooked breakfast, actual breakfast, not just whatever he could shove in his mouth while walking out the door. She packed him something to eat at midday. She kept the cabin clean without making a fuss about it. And she worked. Wade had figured she'd stay inside, maybe tend a garden, keep the home fires burning. Instead, Mara asked what needed doing and then did it. She hauled water from the creek. She split firewood. She mucked out the barn and didn't complain about the smell. When Wade mentioned he needed to move the cattle to higher pasture, she saddled her horse and rode out with him without being asked. She was tougher than she looked. Tougher than most men he'd known, actually. You don't have to do this, Wade said one afternoon as Mara hammered a loose board back onto the barn wall. I hired you to cook, not build. Board was loose, Mara said, driving another nail home. Seemed stupid to leave it. Most cooks wouldn't notice. I'm not most cooks. Wade almost smiled, but he also noticed things that didn't add up. Mara never went to town with him when he rode down for supplies. She always found an excuse to stay on the mountain. And every evening, just before sunset, she'd walk to the edge of the property and stare down the trail like she was watching for something, or someone. Wade didn't ask. He'd come to the mountain to escape questions. Seemed hypocritical to start asking them now. But on the 8th night, he woke to the sound of Mara moving around downstairs. Wade pulled on his pants and climbed down from his bed quietly. Mara was standing by the window, staring out into the darkness. She held a kitchen knife in one hand. You hear something? Wade asked. Mara jumped, spinning around. The knife came up instinctively before she recognized him. Sorry, she said quickly, lowering the blade. I heard something outside. Wade moved to the window and looked out. The moon was half full, casting pale light over the clearing. Nothing moved except pine branches swaying in the wind. Probably a deer, Wade said, or a fox. They come around sometimes. Mara nodded, but she didn't put the knife down. Wade studied her in the dim light. Her face was tight with fear she was trying to hide. Mara, he said quietly, someone following you? She went very still. No, she said. You're a terrible liar. Mara's jaw clenched. For a moment, Wade thought she'd keep lying. Then her shoulders sagged. Maybe, she admitted. I don't know for sure. But I've had this feeling for weeks now, like someone's watching, following. She looked at Wade. That's why I came up here. Figured if someone was trailing me, they'd give up once the road got too hard. Who would be following you? Mara hesitated. I don't know, she said. And that, Wade believed, was the truth. But I pissed off the wrong people somewhere along the way. I just don't know which people, exactly. Wade looked out the window again. The clearing was still empty, but now he was listening. The next morning, Wade rode the property line. He told Mara he was checking fences, which wasn't entirely a lie. But mostly he was looking for tracks, signs that someone had been scouting the ranch. He found them near the eastern boundary, fresh horse tracks. 2 riders, from the look of it. They'd come up the back trail, the one Wade barely used because it was steep and dangerous, and stopped just inside the tree line. They'd sat there for a while, probably watching the cabin, then turned back. Wade crouched next to the tracks, his jaw tight. Someone was definitely following Mara, and they'd found her. He spent the rest of the day checking his weapons. He had a Winchester rifle, a shotgun, and a Colt revolver. All clean, all loaded. He also had a nice collection of ammunition he'd been stockpiling over the years. If someone wanted trouble, Wade could provide it. That evening, he sat Mara down at the table. I found tracks, he said bluntly. 2 riders. They came up the back trail yesterday and watched the cabin. Mara's face went pale. Did they? They left, but they know you're here now. Mara closed her eyes. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come. I didn't mean to bring trouble to your door. Too late for that. Wade leaned back in his chair. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me what's really going on, who's following you and why. And then we're going to figure out what to do about it. Wade, I don't let people get run off my land, Wade said flatly. I don't care who they are or what they want. This is my mountain. They want you. They go through me. Mara stared at him. Why would you do that? You don't even know me. Wade thought about that. Why was he doing this? 6 years ago, he would have sent her packing the moment trouble showed up. He'd come to the mountain to be alone, not to fight other people's battles. But something had changed. Maybe it was having someone else in the cabin. Maybe it was seeing Mara work herself half to death without complaining. Maybe it was just being tired of running from everything. Because you make decent biscuits, Wade said, and I'm not giving that up without a fight. Mara laughed. It was a shocked, slightly hysterical sound. Then she started crying, not loud, dramatic tears, just quiet, exhausted crying, the kind that comes when you've been holding everything together for too long and someone finally gives you permission to fall apart. Wade sat there awkwardly, unsure what to do. He wasn't good with emotions. He'd spent 6 years specifically avoiding them. "Sorry," Mara said, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "I'm sorry. Nobody's ever—" "It's fine," Wade said gruffly. "Take your time." Mara took a shaky breath, then another. When she finally spoke, her voice was steadier. "My brother found something he wasn't supposed to see," she said. "Evidence of a land theft scheme. Powerful people were stealing farms and ranches from families who couldn't fight back. Elias, my brother, he tried to expose them. But before he could, he disappeared." Wade's eyes narrowed. "Disappeared how?" "They called it an accident, said he fell off his horse crossing a river. But Elias grew up on rivers. He could swim better than anyone I knew." Mara's voice hardened. "They killed him. I know they did." "Who's they?" "A man named Victor Crow. He runs cattle operations across 3 territories, buys up land cheap, squeezes out small ranchers, sells to the railroad for 10 times what he paid. Elias found proof that Crow was forging documents, bribing officials, using hired guns to scare families off their property. Wade processed that." "And you have this proof?" Mara nodded slowly. "Elias hid it before he died. He gave me a map showing where. I've been carrying that map for 3 months, trying to stay ahead of Crow's men long enough to figure out what to do with it." "Why not take it to the law?" "Because half the law is on Crow's payroll." Mara's laugh was bitter. "You think a sheriff making $30 a month is going to go against a man who owns half the territory? Elias tried that. It's probably why he's dead." Wade sat back, thinking. This was bigger than he'd expected. Bigger and more dangerous. "Where's the evidence hidden?" he asked. "A town called Red Mercy, about 4 days' ride south. There's an old church near the canyon. Elias hid everything under the floorboards. And Crow's men are trying to find it first. Or find me and make me tell them where it is." Mara looked at Wade. "I should leave, tonight, before they come back with more men." "No." "Wade, you leave, they'll just follow you again. And next time you might not have a mountain to hide on." Wade stood up, walking to the window. "We need to get that evidence before they do. Take it somewhere Crow's money doesn't reach, federal land office maybe, or a territorial judge." Mara stood up too. "You can't be serious. You'd ride into the middle of this for someone you just met?" Wade turned to face her. "I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because I hate men who think they can take whatever they want just because they've got money and guns." That was partly true. The whole truth was more complicated. Wade had spent 6 years hiding from the world because the world had disappointed him too many times. But Mara hadn't disappointed him. She'd worked hard, kept her head down, and only asked for a fair chance. She reminded him of the person he used to be, before cynicism hollowed him out. "We leave at first light," Wade said. "Pack light. Bring that map." "And Mara?" "Yeah?" "If Crow's men come for us, I'm not going to ask questions before I start shooting." Mara nodded slowly. "Good." They didn't sleep much that night. Wade spent hours checking his gear, loading saddlebags, making sure his guns were clean and ready. Mara packed food, filled canteens, and rolled up bedding they'd need for the trail. Around midnight, Wade heard her moving around the loft. He climbed the ladder and found her sitting on her mattress, staring at a small leather journal. "What's that?" Wade asked. Mara looked up. "Elias's journal. It's all I have left of him." She ran her fingers over the worn cover. "He used to write in it every night. Stories, ideas, things he saw during the day. After he disappeared, I went through his room and found it hidden under his bed." "Does it say anything about the evidence?" "Just the map and a note." Mara opened to a page near the back and read aloud. "If you're reading this, Mara, I'm probably gone. Don't try to be a hero. Take the evidence to someone who'll listen. Stay safe, stay smart, and remember, you're tougher than anyone gives you credit for." Her voice cracked on the last sentence. Wade sat down on the edge of the loft floor. "Sounds like he knew you pretty well." "He was the only one who ever did." Mara closed the journal. Everyone else just saw the fat girl who couldn't catch a husband. Elias saw his little sister who could outwork half the ranch hands and didn't take shit from anybody. He was right. Mara looked at Wade, surprised. "You are tougher than people give you credit for," Wade said. "I've seen grown men quit this mountain after one winter. You've been here a week, and you haven't complained once." "I complain," Mara said, Just not out loud. Wade almost smiled. Fair enough. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like rushing water. Wade? Mara said quietly. Yeah? Why are you really doing this? Wade thought about lying, about giving her some simple answer that didn't require him to examine his own motivations too closely. But she'd been honest with him. She deserved the same. Because I've spent 6 years alone on this mountain telling myself I don't need anyone, Wade said. And then you showed up and made me realize that maybe I was just scared of getting hurt again. So I figured it was time to stop being a coward. Mara studied him in the dim light. You're not a coward, she said. We'll see. Wade climbed back down the ladder and lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow they'd ride into danger for evidence that might not even exist anymore. They'd be going up against a man with money, power, and hired killers. It was possibly the stupidest thing Wade had ever done. But for the first time in 6 years, he felt awake, alert, like he had a purpose beyond just surviving another winter. He fell asleep with his rifle within arm's reach and the sound of Mara's breathing floating down from the loft above. They left an hour before dawn. Wade locked the cabin, scattered feed for the chickens, and turned the cattle loose in the high pasture where they could graze for a week without supervision. If this went bad, if they didn't come back, at least the animals would have a chance. Mara sat on her horse, the saddlebag with the map strapped tight to her saddle. She'd tied her hair back and wore a jacket despite the summer heat. She looked nervous but determined. Last chance to change your mind, Wade said, swinging up onto his own horse. Not a chance in hell, Mara replied. They rode down the mountain as the sun broke over the eastern peaks. The trail was steep and treacherous in the pre-dawn light. Wade's horse picked its way carefully over loose stones and exposed roots. Behind him, Mara's older horse moved slower, but steady. They'd made it halfway down when Wade spotted movement in the trees below. He held up a hand. Mara stopped immediately. 3 riders sat on the trail ahead, blocking the path. They weren't trying to hide. They wanted to be seen. That's far enough, Coulter, one of them called out. Wade recognized the voice. Silas Reed, a hired gun who'd worked for various cattle operations over the years. Wade had seen him in Ash Hollow a few times. Mean eyes, quick temper, and a reputation for violence that kept most people from crossing him. Trail's public, Reed, Wade called back. We're just passing through. Not with her, you're not. Reed nodded toward Mara. Miss Bennett has something that doesn't belong to her. We're here to collect it. Mara's horse shifted nervously. Wade could feel the tension rolling off her. She doesn't have anything of yours, Wade said evenly. That's not what Mr. Crow says. Reed's hand drifted toward his gun. Now, we can do this easy, or we can do this hard. But either way, that saddlebag's coming with us. Wade's mind raced, 3 against 2. They were on higher ground, but that also meant less room to maneuver. If shooting started, Mara would be exposed. What's in the saddlebag that's got Crow so worked up? Wade asked, buying time. Reed smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. That's between him and the lady. You want to walk away from this, Coulter? Now's the time. Nobody needs to know you were involved. And if I don't, then you're going to learn why people don't cross Victor Crow. Wade looked at Mara. She was pale, but her eyes were steady. She gave him the smallest nod. Whatever happened next, she was with him. Wade looked back at Reed. Tell Crow if he wants what's in that bag, he can ride up the mountain and ask for it himself. Otherwise, get out of our way. Reed's smile vanished. Wrong answer, he said. His hand went for his gun. Wade was faster. The Winchester came up smooth and deadly. Wade's first shot hit Reed in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. The other 2 riders scattered, reaching for their own weapons. Ride! Wade shouted to Mara. She didn't need to be told twice. Her horse lunged forward, charging straight at the gap between the riders. One of them tried to grab her reins, but Mara swung her canteen at his head, connecting with a solid thunk that sent him reeling. Wade fired twice more, keeping the men's heads down. Then he spurred his own horse forward, following Mara down the trail. Behind them, shots cracked through the morning air. A bullet whined past Wade's ear, too close. Another kicked up dirt near his horse's hooves. They rode hard, leaning low over their horses' necks. The trail twisted sharply, and for a moment they were out of sight. Wade risked a glance back. 2 riders were following. Reed was down, probably hurt too bad to ride. but the other two were coming fast. "Keep going!" Wade yelled to Mara. "Don't stop!" They hit the bottom of the mountain at a full gallop and turned south toward open country. The horses were already breathing hard, but there was no choice. If they slowed down, Crow's men would catch them, and Wade had a feeling Reed wouldn't be offering any more chances to walk away. They rode for 3 hours straight before Wade finally let them slow to a walk. Both horses were lathered with sweat, their sides heaving. Mara looked worse than her mount, her face flushed red, hair plastered to her forehead, gripping the saddle horn like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "We need to rest," Wade said, guiding his horse toward a cluster of cottonwood trees near a creek. "Water the horses. Catch our breath." Mara slid off her saddle and nearly collapsed. Wade caught her elbow, steadying her. "I'm fine," she said quickly, pulling away. But she wasn't. Her hands were shaking. "You did good back there," Wade said. "That move with the canteen, that was smart." "I wasn't trying to be smart. I was trying not to die." Mara led her horse to the creek and let it drink. "Did you kill him, Reed?" "Don't know. Hit his shoulder, maybe chest. He went down hard." Wade checked his rifle, reloading the spent rounds. "The other two will go back for him. That buys us time." "How much time?" "Maybe a day. Maybe less if they're motivated." Wade scanned the horizon behind them. Empty grassland stretched for miles, broken only by the occasional tree or rock formation. "They'll send more men. Crow's not going to let this go." Mara sat down heavily on a fallen log. She pulled the saddlebag onto her lap and opened it, checking the contents. Wade caught a glimpse of a folded map and what looked like a stack of papers wrapped in oilcloth. "Is that it?" he asked. "The evidence?" "Just the map to where it's hidden. Elias was smart enough not to carry the actual documents around." Mara refolded the map carefully. "He said if Crow's men ever caught him, they'd get nothing but a piece of paper that wouldn't make sense without the key." "What key?" Mara pulled out a small leather bookmark from her brother's journal. Pressed into the leather were a series of numbers and symbols. It's a cipher. The map shows landmarks, but without the cipher, you don't know which landmarks matter." Wade studied the bookmark. "Your brother didn't trust easy, did he?" "Would you?" "In his position." Mara tucked the bookmark back into the journal. Elias spent 2 years gathering that evidence. He interviewed families who'd been cheated, copied documents from land offices, tracked down witnesses. He knew if Crow found out what he was doing, he was dead, so he made sure the evidence would survive, even if he didn't. Smart man. He was. Mara's voice went quiet. Smarter than me, anyway. I would have just confronted Crow and gotten myself killed within a week. Wade sat down on the log beside her. The creek burbled nearby, a peaceful sound that felt wrong given the circumstances. "You confronted those riders back on the trail," Wade said. "Swung a canteen at a man with a gun. That takes guts, not smarts." "Guts won't keep me alive if Crow catches up." "No, but running won't either." Wade looked at her. "We get to Red Mercy, we get that evidence, and we take it straight to the federal land office in Dry River Crossing. That's 3 territories away from Crow's reach. Let the government lawyers tear him apart." Mara met his eyes. "You really think it'll work? Men like Crow don't go down easy." "No, but they go down eventually." Wade stood up, checking his horse. "Everyone's got a weak spot. We just have to find his." They rested another 20 minutes, then mounted up and rode south. The sun climbed higher, turning the grassland into a shimmering oven. Wade kept watching their back trail, but saw no dust clouds, no riders. Either Crow's men were hanging back or they were taking a different route. Neither option made him feel better. By late afternoon, they reached a shallow river crossing. The water was low, barely reaching the horse's knees, but the current was stronger than it looked. Wade went first, testing the footing. His horse struggled halfway across where the riverbed dropped suddenly, but made it through. Mara followed. Her older horse moved slower, more cautious. Halfway across, it stumbled. Mara lurched forward, grabbing mane. The horse recovered, but the saddlebag slipped sideways. Mara made a grab for it and overcorrected. For a horrible moment, Wade thought she was going over. "Hold on!" he shouted, already turning his horse back. But Mara caught herself. She hauled the saddlebag back into place and kicked her horse forward. They made it across, water streaming from the horse's legs and Mara's boots. "You all right?" Wade asked. "Yeah, just clumsy." Mara was breathing hard. That bag almost went in the river. Next time, let it go. You're more important than a map. Mara looked at him like he'd suggested she cut off her own arm. That map is the only thing keeping Elias's death from being meaningless. Wade didn't argue. He understood the feeling. Sometimes the only thing that kept you moving was the idea that your suffering had to count for something. They rode until sunset painted the sky orange and purple, then made camp in a ravine that offered some cover from the wind. Wade built a small fire while Mara unpacked their food. She'd brought hardtack, jerky, and some dried apples. Not much, but enough. They ate in silence, both too tired to talk. After dinner, Wade checked his guns again while Mara spread out her bedroll. "I'll take first watch," Wade said. "Wake you in 4 hours. You think they're close?" "I think we're stupid if we assume they're not." Mara nodded and lay down, pulling a blanket over herself. Within minutes, she was asleep. The deep, exhausted sleep of someone who'd been running on fear and adrenaline for too long. Wade sat with his back against a rock, rifle across his knees, and watched the darkness. The night was quiet except for wind and distant coyotes. Stars came out in thick clusters, more than you ever saw near towns with their lamps and fires. Wade had always liked the stars. They were constant, reliable, unlike people. Around midnight, Mara started making noises in her sleep, small, distressed sounds. Wade looked over and saw her moving restlessly, caught in some nightmare. "Elias," she murmured. "Don't, please don't." Wade hesitated. He wasn't good with this kind of thing. Emotions, comfort, knowing what to say. That was why he'd lived alone for 6 years. But he also couldn't just sit there and listen to her suffer. He moved over to her bedroll and touched her shoulder gently. "Mara, wake up." She jerked awake, eyes wide and frightened in the firelight. For a second, she didn't seem to recognize him. Then awareness came back. "Sorry," she said, sitting up. "Nightmare. I figured." Wade moved back to his rock. "You want to talk about it?" "Not really." Mara pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "It's always the same one. Elias drowning, calling for help. And I can't reach him." Wade said nothing. What could he say? That it wasn't her fault? That she couldn't have saved him? People said that kind of thing because they thought it helped, but it never did. Guilt didn't care about logic. "My father drowned," Wade said instead. "Flash flood. I was 12. We were checking cattle after a storm, and the creek rose faster than we expected, swept him right off his horse." Mara looked at him. "I'm sorry. I blame myself for years. Thought if I'd been faster, stronger, smarter, I could have grabbed him, pulled him out." Wade stared into the fire. "Took me a long time to understand that some things just happen. Not because you failed, not because you weren't good enough. They just happen. You believe that now?" "Most days." Wade met her eyes. "Your brother knew the risks. He went after Crow anyway because he thought it mattered. That was his choice, not yours." Mara was quiet for a long moment. "He used to tell me I worried too much," she said finally. "Said I needed to trust myself more. Stop apologizing for taking up space in the world." She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Look how that turned out. I'm still apologizing, still making myself smaller." "You charged 3 armed men on a mountain trail this morning," Wade pointed out. "That doesn't sound small to me." "That was desperation, not courage." "Sometimes they're the same thing." Mara looked at him for a long moment, then she lay back down. "Wake me when it's my turn to watch." "Will do." She closed her eyes, but Wade didn't think she went back to sleep. He sat there until his 4 hours were up, then gently shook her shoulder. She took the rifle without complaint and settled against the rock while Wade rolled into his own blanket. He fell asleep listening to the fire crackle and Mara humming something under her breath. An old song. Familiar, though he couldn't place it. It reminded him that he wasn't alone anymore. He still wasn't sure if that was good or bad. The next morning, they reached the town of Serpent's Bend. It was barely a town, more like a collection of buildings that had gotten tired of being scattered and decided to huddle together for protection. A general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and maybe 20 houses. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business and strangers were noticed immediately. Wade didn't like it, but they needed supplies. The horses needed grain, and their water was running low. "Stay close," Wade told Mara as they rode down the dirt street. Don't talk to anyone unless you have to. What about you? I'll handle the talking. They tied their horses outside the general store. Inside, an old man with a magnificent beard looked up from behind the counter. Help you? He asked. Need grain for the horses, Wade said. Water, maybe some coffee if you've got it. Got all three. 20 cents for the grain, 5 for the water, 10 for the coffee. Wade paid. While the old man measured out the grain, Wade noticed him glancing at Mara with obvious curiosity. You two passing through? The old man asked. That's right. Headed south? Yep. The old man tied up the grain sack and set it on the counter. Might want to take the eastern trail. Heard there's trouble on the southern road. Wade's hand paused, reaching for the sack. What kind of trouble? Riders. Stopped here yesterday asking questions. Rough-looking bunch. Said they were tracking someone who stole from their boss. The old man's eyes flicked to Mara again. Might be nothing, but might be worth avoiding. Thanks for the warning, Wade said carefully. He picked up the supplies and headed for the door. Outside, Mara grabbed his arm. He knows. Maybe. Or maybe he's just a nosy old man. Wade, he described Crow's men perfectly. They were here yesterday. That means they're ahead of us. Wade loaded the grain onto his horse, thinking. If Crow's men were already south of them, that meant they'd either predicted Wade and Mara's route or had split their forces. Neither was good. We take the eastern trail like he said, Wade decided. It'll add time, but hey! Wade turned. A man was walking toward them from the saloon, young, maybe 25, with a deputy's star pinned to his vest. He had the kind of face that still believed the law meant something. You folks just come through? The deputy asked. Passing through, Wade said, not staying. Mind if I ask where you're headed? Mind if I ask why it matters? The deputy's friendly expression cooled a little. We had some trouble yesterday. Men came through asking about a woman matching your companion's description, said she was wanted for theft. That's a lie, Mara said, her voice sharp. I haven't stolen anything. I'm not saying you did, ma'am, but I'd like to hear your side of it. The deputy looked at Wade. Both of you, just a conversation, won't take long. Wade could see where this was going. The deputy was young and earnest, probably trying to do his job the right way. But that didn't matter. If they stayed and answered questions, word would spread. Crow would know exactly where they were. We're in a hurry, Wade said. No time for conversation. I'm afraid I have to insist. Wade's hand drifted toward his rifle. The deputy noticed. His own hand moved to his gun. For a tense moment, nobody moved. Then Mara stepped between them. My name is Mara Bennett, she said, looking the deputy straight in the eye. The men who came through here work for Victor Crow. They're trying to stop me from exposing a land theft operation that's been robbing families for years. My brother died trying to bring Crow to justice. I'm finishing what he started. Now you can either help us or get out of our way, but we're not staying here to get caught. The deputy blinked, clearly not expecting a speech. He looked at Wade, then back at Mara. Victor Crow, he said slowly. The cattleman? The thief, Mara corrected. Check with the land office in Dry River Crossing in about a week. You'll see. The deputy's hand moved away from his gun. I heard stories about Crow. Nothing proven, but stories. Families losing their land to paperwork they didn't understand. Witnesses who stopped talking after getting visits from his men. Then you know I'm telling the truth, Mara said. The deputy was quiet for a moment. Then he stepped aside. The Eastern Trail will get you to Red Mercy in 2 days if you ride hard, he said quietly. Stay off the main road. Crow's men are watching it. Wade nodded. Appreciate it. Ma'am, the deputy looked at Mara. I hope you make it. Someone needs to stop men like him. I will, Mara said, or die trying. They mounted up and rode out of Serpent's Bend at a quick trot. Wade kept expecting to hear the deputy change his mind, maybe shout for them to stop. But nothing came. Once they were clear of town, Mara let out a long breath. That was stupid, she said. I shouldn't have told him everything. It worked, didn't it? This time. What about next time when the person we tell isn't so understanding? Wade didn't have an answer for that. They followed the Eastern Trail for the rest of the day. It was rougher than the main road, cutting through rocky hills and dense scrub. Harder on the horses, harder on them. But it kept them out of sight. As the sun started to set, they spotted smoke rising from behind a hill. Wade held up a hand, stopping. They dismounted and crept forward on foot, leaving the horses tied to a juniper tree. At the top of the hill, they looked down into a small valley. A camp. 4 men, 4 horses. One of them was tall with a distinctive black coat. Even from a distance, Wade could see the blood stain on his shoulder. Silas Reed. "He's alive," Mara whispered. "You didn't kill him." "Should have aimed better," Wade muttered. They watched the camp for several minutes. Reed was sitting by the fire, his arm in a makeshift sling. The other men were cooking dinner, talking in low voices. From the looks of it, they were settling in for the night. "They're between us and Red Mercy," Mara said. "We can't go around them without adding another day to the trip." "No, but we can go through them." Mara looked at him. "What?" "Tonight, after they're asleep. We slip past their camp, take the trail south. By the time they wake up, we'll have hours on them." "And if they hear us?" "Then we ride like hell and hope our horses are faster." It was a terrible plan, but it was the only plan they had. They went back to their horses and waited. Wade checked his rifle for the 3rd time. Mara sat with her back against a rock, the saddlebag clutched to her chest. "You scared?" Wade asked. "Terrified," Mara admitted. "You?" "Yeah." "You don't look scared." "I've had practice hiding it." Wade set the rifle down. 6 years on that mountain, I was scared every winter that I wouldn't make it to spring. Scared I'd get hurt and there'd be no one to help. Scared I'd wake up one day and realize I'd wasted my whole life being angry at people who didn't even remember I existed. Mara looked at him. "Is that why you left? Whatever life you had before the mountain?" Wade was quiet for a long time. "I had a wife," he said finally. "Emily. We had a ranch down in the valley. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. We were building something." "What happened?" "She got sick, fever. The doctor said it was pneumonia, maybe something worse. I rode 2 days to get medicine from the nearest town. When I got back..." Wade stopped. Even now, 6 years later, the memory cut like a knife. "She was gone." "I'm sorry," Mara said softly. "Everyone said it wasn't my fault, that there was nothing I could have done. But I kept thinking if I'd been faster, if I'd noticed she was sick sooner, if I'd had money for a better doctor." Wade shook his head. "So I sold the ranch and disappeared. Figured if I couldn't save the one person who mattered, what was the point of being around people at all?" Mara was quiet. Then, "Elias told me something once, after our mother died. He said guilt is just love with nowhere to go. We feel guilty because we still care, even when the person is gone." Wade looked at her. "Your brother was smart." "Yeah, he was." They sat in silence as the stars came out overhead. Below, the light from Crow's camp flickered against the hillside. Around midnight, Wade touched Mara's shoulder. "Time to move." They led their horses on foot, walking slowly and quietly down the dark trail. Wade's heart hammered against his ribs. One nervous whinny from a horse, one kicked stone, and Crow's men would be on them. They got within 50 yards of the camp. Wade could hear snoring, see the shapes of men rolled in blankets near the dying fire. One man was supposed to be on watch, but his head was nodded forward. Asleep or close to it. Wade gestured for Mara to follow. They moved like ghosts, stepping carefully, breathing shallow. The trail bent around the camp, staying just out of the firelight's reach. They were almost past when Mara's horse snorted. The sound cut through the night like a gunshot. Wade froze. In the camp, the man on watch jerked upright. "Who's there?" he called out, reaching for his rifle. Wade grabbed Mara's arm. "Run!" They threw themselves onto their horses and kicked hard. Behind them, shouts erupted. Gunfire cracked. A bullet whined past Wade's head. They crashed through the brush, branches whipping at their faces. Wade couldn't see the trail in the darkness. He was just riding blind, trusting his horse to find footing. Behind him, he could hear Mara's horse crashing through the undergrowth, could hear her gasping for breath. More gunshots. The men were mounting up, giving chase. Wade leaned low over his horse's neck, urging it faster. They broke out of the brush and hit open ground. The trail stretched ahead, a pale ribbon in the starlight. "Don't stop," Wade yelled. "Keep riding." They rode for what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes. Finally, the sounds of pursuit faded. Wade risked a look back. No torches. No riders visible in the darkness. They'd lost them. For now. Wade slowed his horse to a trot, then a walk. Mara pulled up alongside him, her face barely visible in the darkness. "Are they?" she started. "Gone. But they'll come after us at first light." "How much of a lead do we have?" "Maybe 3 hours? 4 if we're lucky." Wade looked at her. "How much farther to Red Mercy?" Mara pulled out the map, but it was too dark to read. "Half a day, maybe less. The church is on the south side of town near the canyon. Then we ride until dawn. No stops. No rest." "The horses?" "Will survive. They have to." Wade's voice was grim. "Because if Crow's men catch us before we get that evidence, your brother died for nothing." Mara's face hardened. "Then let's ride." They pushed on through the darkness, 2 desperate riders racing against time and men who wanted them dead. The horses were exhausted. Wade and Mara were beyond exhausted. But they kept moving, because stopping meant dying. And neither of them was ready to die yet. Dawn found them on the outskirts of Red Mercy, both barely able to stay upright in their saddles. The horses were done. Wade's gelding was limping slightly, favoring its left front leg. Mara's old mare looked ready to collapse. They'd pushed the animals harder than Wade had ever pushed anything in his life, and it showed. Red Mercy sprawled across a dusty valley between 2 canyon walls, bigger than Serpent's Bend, smaller than Ash Hollow. Maybe 200 people lived here, most of them working the copper mine that had given the town its name. The buildings were a mix of wood and adobe, weathered by wind and sun until they all looked the same faded brown. "There," Mara said, pointing with a shaking hand. "South edge, see the steeple?" Wade squinted through the early morning light. A church stood alone near the canyon rim, separated from the rest of town by maybe a quarter mile. It looked abandoned, roof partially caved in, windows dark and empty. "That's it?" "That's where Elias hid everything." Mara swayed in her saddle. Wade reached out to steady her. "Sorry, just tired." "We both are." Wade looked back the way they'd come. The trail was empty, but that didn't mean much. Crow's men could be an hour behind them, maybe less. "We get in, get the evidence, and get out. No delays." "What about the horses? They need rest." "They'll get it, after." Wade nudged his gelding forward. The horse responded reluctantly, every step looking painful. "Come on, almost there." They rode slowly through the outskirts of town. A few early risers stared at them, 2 dust-covered, exhausted riders on horses that looked half dead. But nobody stopped them. Small frontier towns had learned not to ask too many questions about strangers passing through. The church loomed larger as they approached. Up close, it looked even worse than from a distance. The front door hung crooked on broken hinges. Part of the roof had collapsed, exposing beams black with rot. Weeds grew up through cracks in the foundation. "Why here?" Wade asked as they dismounted. "Why would your brother hide evidence in a place like this?" "Because nobody comes here anymore. Town built a new church 3 years ago after this one started falling apart. Elias figured it'd be empty for years." Mara tied her horse to a post that looked like it might snap in a strong wind. He was right. Wade grabbed his rifle and checked the area one more time. Still no sign of pursuit, but his skin prickled with the feeling of being watched. They pushed through the crooked door into darkness that smelled of rot and bird droppings. Light filtered through the holes in the roof, creating scattered pools of illumination across the dusty floor. Old pews lay scattered like fallen soldiers. The pulpit at the far end had toppled over, spilling papers and debris. "Where?" Wade asked quietly. Something about the dead church made him want to whisper. Mara pulled out her brother's journal and the leather bookmark with its cipher. She studied them both, then walked toward the left side of the sanctuary. 3rd row from the front, 4 boards from the center aisle. She knelt down, running her hands over the warped floorboards. "Help me." Wade set his rifle down and joined her. The boards were old, some of them loose already. He worked his knife into the gap between the 3rd and 4th boards, prying gently. Wood cracked. The board lifted. Underneath, wrapped in oilcloth and tucked into a hollow space between the floor joists, was a leather satchel. Mara pulled it out with shaking hands. She unwrapped the oilcloth carefully, almost reverently. Inside the satchel were papers, lots of them, maps, contracts, letters, a ledger book with columns of numbers. "This is it," Mara whispered. "This is everything Elias collected." Wade picked up one of the contracts. It was a land deed signed by someone named Thomas Crawford, but there was a note in the margin in different handwriting. Forged signature. TC cannot write. Mark verified by witness J. Morrison. He picked up another document, and another. Each one detailed some aspect of Crow's operation. Families tricked into signing papers they couldn't read. Officials bribed to look the other way. Threatening letters sent to people who asked too many questions. Your brother was thorough, Wade said. He knew he'd only get one chance. Mara was reading through a letter, tears streaming down her face. This is from the Morrison family. They lost their ranch because Crow claimed they hadn't paid their taxes. But they had. Elias found the receipts. They were marked paid in full, and then the records got changed after Crow's men visited the tax office. Wade looked at the pile of evidence. How many families? Elias documented 43, but he thought there were more. Families who left the territory or died before he could talk to them. Mara wiped her eyes. 43 families robbed of everything they owned, and nobody did anything because Crow had money, and they didn't. They will now. Wade started packing the documents back into the satchel. Federal Land Office won't ignore this. Too much proof. Too many. The church door banged open. Wade spun around, reaching for his rifle, but he'd set it down 3 feet away. Too far. Silas Reed stood in the doorway, his arm still in a sling, his face twisted with pain and anger. Behind him were 3 more men, all armed. End of the line, Coulter, Reed said. His voice was rough, strained. You and the fat girl made us work for this. I'll give you that. Wade's hand inched toward his gun. Reed saw it. Don't, Reed warned. I've got 4 guns on you. You'll be dead before you clear leather. Wade believed him. He raised his hand slowly. Beside him, Mara clutched the satchel to her chest. Reed walked forward, favoring his wounded side. His face was pale, sweating despite the cool morning air. The shoulder wound was bad. Infected, probably. He should have been in bed with a doctor, not chasing people across the frontier. Give me the satchel, Reed said. No. Mara's voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. Reed sighed. He pulled his gun with his good hand and pointed it at Wade's head. Give me the satchel, or I'll kill him right now. Your choice. Mara looked at Wade. He could see her trying to decide, weighing one impossible choice against another. Don't, Wade said quietly. Shut up, Reed snapped. He cocked the hammer. I'm counting to 3. 1, Wait. Mara stood up, still holding the satchel. I'll give it to you. Just don't hurt him. Smart girl, Reed gestured with the gun. Bring it here. Mara walked toward him slowly. Wade watched, his mind racing. 4 guns, 4 men, all of them between Wade and the door. Even if he could get to his rifle, even if he got a shot off, they'd kill Mara before he could take down more than 1 or 2. Unless. Wade's eyes flicked to the ceiling, to the rotted beams, the partially collapsed roof. The whole structure was unstable. One good impact in the right place, and it might come down. Might. Maybe. Probably not. But it was the only chance they had. Mara reached Reed and held out the satchel. He grabbed it with his wounded arm, wincing at the movement. For just a second, his gun wavered. Wade lunged for his rifle. Reed swung his gun back toward Wade, but Mara was faster. She grabbed Reed's wounded shoulder and squeezed. Reed screamed. The gun went off, the shot going wild. Wade's hands found the rifle and he rolled, coming up on one knee. The other 3 men were raising their weapons. Wade didn't aim for them. He aimed for the support beam directly above their heads. The Winchester cracked twice. Wood splintered. The beam sagged. Get out! Wade yelled at Mara. She was already running, the satchel clutched tight. Wade fired again, hitting a second beam. The roof groaned, a deep sound like the building itself was in pain. Then it started to collapse. Wade threw himself backward as timber and shingles came crashing down. One of Crow's men tried to run but didn't make it. The beam caught him across the shoulders, driving him to the floor. The other 2 scattered, shouting. Reed was on his knees, still screaming, his shoulder bleeding through the bandages. Wade scrambled to his feet and ran for the door. Behind him, the church was tearing itself apart. More beams fell. The walls shuddered. Dust filled the air so thick he could barely breathe. He burst out into daylight, coughing. Mara was already on her horse, trying to control the terrified animal. Wade's gelding had broken free and was running in circles. Wade, Mara shouted. He ran for the horse, caught the reins, hauled himself into the saddle. The gelding was limping worse now, the night's hard ride catching up to it. Behind them, two of Crow's men stumbled out of the collapsing church. One of them raised his rifle. Wade and Mara kicked their horses and ran. The shot missed. More gunfire followed them as they raced away from the church, heading not back toward town, but toward the canyon rim. It wasn't the way they'd planned to go, but they didn't have a choice. The men were between them and the main trail. "Where are we going?" Mara yelled over the thunder of hooves. "Anywhere but here." The canyon opened before them like a wound in the earth. The trail along the rim was narrow, barely wide enough for a horse. On one side was solid rock. On the other was a drop that went down and down and down. Wade's horse balked at the edge. He kicked it hard, forcing it forward. Behind him, Mara's mare followed reluctantly. They were 20 yards along the canyon trail when Wade heard more hoofbeats. He looked back and cursed. 2 riders. Coming fast. They must have had horses tied nearby, or they'd stolen them from town. It didn't matter. They were coming. "Faster," Wade urged his limping horse. The gelding tried, but it was struggling. Each step looked painful. They weren't going to outrun anyone. The trail curved sharply around a rock outcropping. Wade pulled hard on the reins, guiding the horse around the turn. Loose stones skittered over the edge, falling into the canyon with no sound of impact. That's how deep it was. Mara's horse slipped on the curve. For a horrible moment, Wade thought she was going over, but the mare caught herself, hooves scrabbling for purchase on the stone trail. More gunfire. A bullet ricocheted off the canyon wall, sending rock chips flying. Wade felt one slice across his cheek, a bright line of pain. The trail widened slightly ahead, opening into a small plateau. Wade pulled his horse to a stop and turned it around. "What are you doing?" Mara shouted. "Can't outrun them. Have to fight." Wade pulled his rifle and took aim. The 2 riders came around the curve. Wade fired. The lead rider jerked backward, hit. His horse reared, throwing him. The man tumbled sideways and went over the edge. His scream lasted 3 seconds before cutting off. The second rider pulled up hard, his horse skidding on loose stone. He raised his gun. Wade's rifle clicked empty. The rider smiled and aimed carefully. Then Mara's horse crashed into his from the side. Both horses screamed. The rider's gun went flying. He grabbed for the saddle horn, but the force of the impact knocked him loose. He fell sideways, hands scrabbling for purchase. He caught the edge of the trail. For a moment he hung there, legs kicking over nothing. Wade walked over and looked down at him. The man's face was red with effort, eyes wide with terror. "Please," the man gasped, "help me up." Wade thought about it. Thought about all the families this man had probably terrorized while working for Crow. Thought about Elias Bennett drowning in a river because men like this made sure nobody investigated too closely. Then he thought about the kind of man he wanted to be. He reached down and grabbed the man's wrist, hauling him back onto solid ground. The man lay there gasping, staring up at Wade in disbelief. "Get out of here," Wade said. "Tell Crow we're taking his empire down. Tell him to run while he still can." The man scrambled to his feet and ran back down the trail on foot, not even looking for his horse. Wade turned to Mara. She was still on her horse, breathing hard, her face pale. "You all right?" he asked. "I just killed a man," she said quietly. "You saved my life." "I still killed him." Mara looked at the spot where the first rider had gone over. I didn't think I could." Wade walked over and touched her leg gently. "Hey, look at me." She did. Tears were running down her face. "You did what you had to do," Wade said. "That's all any of us can do. You understand?" Mara nodded, but Wade could see the shock settling in. He recognized it. He'd felt the same thing the first time he'd killed a man, years ago. The awful realization that you were capable of taking a life. That some part of you could make that choice and live with it. "We need to keep moving," Wade said gently. "Reed might still be alive. There might be more men." "I know." Mara wiped her face. "I know. I'm okay." She wasn't, but she was functional. That would have to be enough. They followed the canyon trail for another mile before it curved back toward open ground. Wade's horse was barely walking now. The limp had gotten worse, and the animal's breathing was labored. "We need to stop," Mara said. "Your horse is hurt. Another few miles, get some distance, then we'll rest." "Wade, it's going lame. If we keep pushing, we'll ruin it completely." Wade knew she was right. He hated it, but she was right. They found a small grove of trees near a creek and stopped. Wade dismounted and checked his gelding's leg. The horse had thrown a shoe and the hoof was cracked. Not catastrophic, but bad enough. "Can you fix it?" Mara asked. "Not without a blacksmith and time we don't have." Wade ran his hand down the horse's neck. The gelding had carried him faithfully for 4 years, had never let him down, and now Wade had broken it in one desperate night. "We'll have to share my horse," Mara said. Wade looked at her mare. The old horse was exhausted, ribcage heaving with each breath. It couldn't carry both of them far. "No, you take your horse and go. I'll follow on foot." "Don't be stupid." "I'm not. Your horse can't carry us both, but it can carry you in that satchel. You get to Dry River Crossing. Get the evidence to the federal office. That's what matters." "I'm not leaving you." "Mara, I said I'm not leaving you." Her voice cracked. "I already lost my brother to this. I'm not losing anyone else." Wade met her eyes, saw the determination there, the fear, the stubborn refusal to abandon him the way the world had abandoned her so many times. "All right," he said quietly. "We go together." They rested for an hour. Wade let both horses drink and graze while he and Mara ate the last of their food. It wasn't much, some hardtack and jerky that tasted like leather. Mara opened the satchel and looked through the evidence again. She handled each document carefully, like it was precious. 43 families, she said again. Some of them had kids. I read the statements. Kids who grew up thinking their parents lost everything through bad luck or stupidity, never knowing they were robbed. "They'll know now," Wade said. "Will they care? I mean, years later when they've moved on and built new lives, will it matter?" "It'll matter. Truth always matters, even if it comes late." Wade tossed a pebble into the creek. "My father told me once that injustice unpunished doesn't just hurt the victim. It hurts everyone. Makes people think that might makes right, that if you're big enough and mean enough, you can take whatever you want." "Your father sounds like he was a good man." "He tried to be. Didn't always succeed, but he tried." Wade looked at her. "Like your brother." Mara closed the satchel. "Elias wasn't perfect. He drank too much sometimes, got in fights, could be stubborn and reckless. But he gave a damn about people. That counted for something. Counted for a lot." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the creek babble and the horses crop grass. It was peaceful. Almost made Wade forget they were being hunted. Almost. "Wade?" Mara said eventually. "What happens after? After we deliver the evidence and Crow goes down? What then?" Wade hadn't let himself think that far ahead. He'd been focused on survival, on the immediate problem. The future felt too distant to consider. "I go back to my mountain, I guess," he said. "By yourself?" "That was always the plan." Mara was quiet. Then, "Seems lonely." "I'm used to lonely." "Doesn't mean it's good for you." Wade looked at her. She was staring at the creek, not meeting his eyes. Her hair had come loose from its braid, falling in messy waves around her face. She looked exhausted, filthy, and more alive than anyone he'd seen in years. "What about you?" he asked. "What's your plan after?" "I don't know. I've been running for so long I forgot what it's like to stop." Mara pulled her knees up to her chest. "Maybe I'll find a town that needs a cook. Or maybe I'll just keep moving. Seems safer that way." "Safer isn't always better," says the man who hid on a mountain for 6 years. Wade almost laughed. She had him there. The hour passed too quickly. When Wade stood to check the horses, his whole body protested. He was sore in places he'd forgotten could hurt. Too many hours in the saddle, too little sleep, too much fear. But they couldn't stay. Wade's gelding still couldn't be ridden. He stripped the saddle and left it under a tree. The horse would be fine here. There was water and grass. Maybe someone from Red Mercy would find it and give it a home. Or maybe it would go wild. Either way, it had a better chance here than continuing on that ruined hoof. Wade piled what supplies they had left onto Mara's mare. Then he helped Mara into the saddle and started walking. They made slow progress. The mare could carry Mara and the supplies, but not quickly. Wade walked beside the horse, rifle in hand, watching the horizon for dust clouds. The sun climbed higher, turning the air into a furnace. Wade's throat was dry, his lips cracked. He'd given most of his water to the horses, keeping barely enough for himself. Around midday, Mara stopped the horse. "This is stupid. she said. "You're going to collapse." "I'm fine." "You're not. You look half dead." She swung down from the saddle. "We take turns, one rides, one walks. Switch every hour." Wade wanted to argue. Wanted to say she needed the horse more, that he was used to hard physical work. But the truth was, his legs were shaking and spots danced at the edges of his vision. 1 hour, he agreed. He climbed into the saddle and they kept moving. The mare plodded along steadily, unbothered by the switch in riders. Good horse. Probably had carried a dozen different people in its long life. When the hour was up, they switched. Mara walked for a while, then Wade walked again. Back and forth, trading exhaustion and small mercies. The landscape began to change as they traveled. The open grassland gave way to rolling hills dotted with scrub oak. In the distance, Wade could see mountains rising blue and hazy. Dry River Crossing was on the far side of those mountains. 2 days' ride, maybe 3 at the pace they were going, if Crow's men didn't catch them first. As the sun started to set, they found a wash that offered some concealment and stopped for the night. No fire this time, too risky. They sat in the gathering dark, sharing the last of their water and trying not to think about how hungry they were. "Tell me about your ranch," Mara said suddenly. "The one you had before the mountain." Wade was quiet for a moment, surprised by the question. He didn't talk about the ranch, didn't talk about Emily. That life was dead and buried. But sitting here in the dark with Mara, it didn't feel wrong to remember. "Small place," he said. 100 acres, maybe. We ran cattle, grew some wheat, had a dog named Rust because he was the color of old iron. Emily hated that name, wanted to call him something fancy like Apollo, but he answered to Rust, so Rust it stayed. "What was she like? Your wife?" "Stubborn, laughed loud, could shoot better than me, which she never let me forget." Wade smiled at the memory. "She grew up on a farm in Kansas, knew more about ranching than I did when we started. I was just a kid who thought he knew everything." "How'd you meet?" "Dance in town. I asked her to dance. She said no because I looked cocky. I asked again an hour later. She said no again. Third time, she finally said yes just to shut me up." "She sounds practical." She was. Too practical to marry a cocky kid with no money and big dreams. But she did it anyway. Wade's smile faded. When she got sick, she didn't complain. Didn't make a fuss. Just got quieter day by day until one morning I woke up and she was gone. "I'm sorry," Mara said softly. "Me too." They sat in silence for a while. Then Mara spoke again. "Elias was sick once when we were kids. Bad fever. We thought we were going to lose him. My mother sat up with him for 3 days straight, barely sleeping, just putting cold cloths on his head and making him drink water." Mara wrapped her arms around herself. On the 3rd night, the fever broke. He opened his eyes and asked for food. My mother cried so hard she couldn't stand up. "But he lived." "Yeah, he lived." Mara's voice went hollow. "For 20 more years, right up until Victor Crow had him killed." Wade didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Sometimes silence was better than empty comfort. Eventually they both lay down, too tired to even pretend they weren't sleeping. Wade kept his rifle close, one hand on the stock, but exhaustion pulled him under before he could worry about keeping watch. He woke in deep night to the sound of Mara crying softly. Wade lay still, listening. She was trying to be quiet about it, muffling the sounds. Crying the way people cry when they don't want anyone to hear. He almost said something, almost reached out to offer comfort, but then he realized she deserved to grieve privately. She'd been holding everything together for months, holding it for him these last few days. She'd earned the right to fall apart where nobody was watching. So Wade stayed quiet and pretended to sleep while Mara mourned her brother in the darkness. Morning came gray and cold, the kind of dawn that promised rain. Wade woke stiff and sore, every muscle protesting as he sat up. Mara was already awake, sitting with her back against a rock, staring at nothing. Her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. "You sleep at all?" Wade asked, his voice rough. "Some." She didn't look at him. "Enough." Wade knew better than to push. He checked the mare, who was grazing on the sparse grass growing in the wad. The horse looked better than either of them felt, which wasn't saying much. They had no food left, no coffee, just half a canteen of water between them and however many miles still lay ahead. "We should move," Mara said, standing up. "The longer we stay still, the easier we are to find. Wade nodded. They packed their few belongings in silence and started walking, taking turns on the mare like they had yesterday. The sky darkened as they traveled, heavy clouds rolling in from the west. By noon, it was raining, not the gentle kind of rain that cooled you off and made the world smell fresh. This was cold, driving rain that soaked through clothes in minutes and turned the ground to mud. The mare slipped twice in the first hour, nearly throwing Mara. After that, they both walked, leading the horse carefully over the increasingly treacherous ground. Wade's boots filled with water. His jacket, already worn thin from 6 years of mountain winters, did almost nothing to keep the rain out. Beside him, Mara trudged along with her head down, the satchel clutched under her coat to keep it dry. They didn't talk. Talking took energy they couldn't spare. Around mid-afternoon, Wade spotted buildings in the distance. A town, or what passed for one out here. Maybe a dozen structures clustered around a crossroads. "That'll be Miller's Fork," Mara said, her teeth chattering. "Elias's map showed it. We're about halfway to Dry River Crossing." "We need to stop," Wade said. "Get dry, get warm, even if it's just for an hour. Too dangerous. Someone might recognize us. We'll be dead by morning if we don't get out of this rain." Wade looked at her. Water streamed down her face. Her lips were turning blue. "1 hour. That's all." Mara hesitated, then nodded. They approached the town cautiously. Most of the buildings looked empty. Miller's Fork was one of those places that had started with big dreams and slowly died when the railroad chose a different route. The main street was mud and abandoned storefronts, but one building showed signs of life. A saloon with smoke coming from its chimney and horses tied outside. Wade and Mara tied the mare next to the other horses and went inside. The warmth hit like a physical thing. Wade's frozen hands started to burn as feeling came back into them. A handful of men sat at tables, drinking and playing cards. They looked up when Wade and Mara entered, curious but not hostile. The bartender was a heavy-set man with gray hair and suspicious eyes. "Help you?" "Coffee if you have it," Wade said, "and whatever food you can spare, we can pay." The bartender looked them over, soaked, exhausted, desperate. "Coffee's 2 cents, stew's 5. Wade dug coins from his pocket with numb fingers. The bartender took them and disappeared into a back room. Wade and Mara found a table near the fire. Wade's hands shook as he tried to wring water out of his jacket. Mara just sat there, staring at the flames, holding the satchel on her lap. The bartender returned with 2 cups of coffee and 2 bowls of something that might have been stew once. It was brown and greasy, but it was hot. Wade drank the coffee in 3 burning gulps and started on the stew. It tasted like dishwater and old meat, but he didn't care. Food was food. Mara ate slowly, mechanically, like someone going through motions they barely remembered. "You all right?" Wade asked quietly. "No." She didn't look up from her bowl. "But I will be. After. When Crow was arrested, when the evidence was delivered, when Elias was avenged, after implied there was something beyond survival." Wade hoped she was right. They were halfway through the stew when the door opened and 3 men walked in. Wade's hand moved instinctively toward his gun. But these weren't Crow's men. They were locals, ranchers or farmers, from the look of them. Weathered faces, work-worn hands, mud on their boots. They ordered drinks and sat at the bar, talking in low voices. Wade tried to relax, but his nerves were shot. Every sound made him tense, every movement caught his eye. Then he heard a name that made his blood freeze. "Heard Crow's men tore apart Red Mercy looking for some woman in a satchel," one of the ranchers was saying. "Whole church collapsed. Killed one of them." "Serves him right," another said. "Crow's a bastard. Been stealing land for years." "Careful saying that. He's got friends in high places." "Not for long, if what I heard is true. Federal investigators are asking questions, something about a land fraud case." Wade kept his head down, but he felt Mara stiffen beside him. The first rancher lowered his voice, but not enough. "My cousin works at the telegraph office in Dry River Crossing. Said they got a wire 3 days ago from someone claiming to have evidence against Crow. Real evidence, not just rumors." 3 days ago? The other man sounded skeptical. "How's that possible? This woman they're looking for couldn't have gotten there yet." "Wasn't from her. Wire came from some lawyer back east. Said his client had died but left instructions to forward certain documents if anything happened to him." Wade's mind raced. Elias. Elias had sent copies of the evidence somewhere before he died. Smart. Even if Crow had killed him, even if Mara had never gotten the map, the truth would have come out eventually. But that meant, so the feds already have evidence? One of the ranchers asked. That's what my cousin said. They've been building a case for months, just needed more proof to make it stick. If this woman makes it to Dry River Crossing with whatever she's carrying, Crow's done. If she makes it. Wade looked at Mara. She was staring into her stew, her face unreadable, but he could see the tremor in her hands. They'd been killing themselves to get evidence to Dry River Crossing, evidence that might not even be needed anymore. Wade paid for the food and coffee, then gestured for Mara to follow him outside. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the sky was still heavy and dark. You heard? Mara asked once they were alone. Yeah. He sent copies. Elias sent copies of everything. She laughed, but it came out broken. All this running, all this fear, and he'd already... Doesn't matter, Wade said. What we're carrying still matters. More evidence means a stronger case. Does it, or are we just risking our lives for nothing? Wade grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Listen to me. What we have in that satchel is proof. Physical proof that a jury can see and touch. Not copies, not telegraphed summaries. The real thing. That matters. You don't know that. I do. Because I've seen how the law works. Lawyers argue about every little detail. They'll say the copies could be forged, that the dead man who sent them had an axe to grind, that there's reasonable doubt. But original documents, contracts with real signatures, ledgers with real numbers, that's harder to dismiss. Mara searched his face. You really believe that? I do. She took a shaky breath. Okay, then we finish this. They walked to where the mare was tied. Wade checked the horse while Mara secured the satchel under her coat. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still slick with mud. Wade was untying the mare when he heard hoofbeats. Lots of them. He looked up and felt his stomach drop. 6 riders were coming down the main street, moving fast. Even from a distance, Wade recognized the lead rider's distinctive black coat. Silas Reed, still alive, still hunting. Move, Wade hissed, grabbing the mare's reins. But it was too late. Reed had seen them. There, Reed shouted, pointing. Don't let them get away. Wade and Mara ran for the edge of town, dragging the exhausted mare behind them. Behind them, the riders spurred their horses, closing the distance fast. They made it maybe 50 yards before Wade realized they weren't going to outrun anyone. Not on foot, not with a horse that could barely walk. He pulled Mara behind a collapsed building and handed her the mare's reins. Go, he said. I'll hold them off. No, go. Wade shoved her toward the back of the building. Get to Dry River Crossing. Finish this. Mara looked at him, her eyes wide with fear, and something else. Something that looked like goodbye. Then she mounted the mare and rode. Wade turned to face the oncoming riders, his rifle raised. 6 men, 6 bullets in the Winchester. If he was lucky, he might take down 3 before they got him. He'd never been that lucky. The riders spread out as they approached, making themselves harder targets. Reed stayed in the center, his wounded arm hanging useless, his good hand holding a revolver. You're done, Coulter, Reed shouted. Give up now and I'll make it quick. Wade didn't answer. He sighted down the barrel, picked his first target, and fired. The shot took a rider on the left, spinning him sideways in his saddle. Wade worked the lever, fired again. Missed. The riders scattered, taking cover behind buildings and water troughs. Gunfire erupted. Bullets smacked into the wood beside Wade's head, kicked up dirt at his feet. He fired twice more, not bothering to aim, just trying to keep them back. 4 bullets left. Reed circled around, trying to flank him. Wade swung the rifle toward him and fired. The shot went wide, but Reed's horse reared, buying Wade a few seconds. 3 bullets. This wasn't going to work. There were too many of them, and Wade was pinned down. In a minute, maybe 2, they'd surround him completely, and that would be that. He needed a new plan. Wade looked around desperately. The collapsed building behind him was mostly rotted timber and old canvas, useless as cover. But attached to it was an old stable, also half collapsed, with hay still piled inside. Hay. Dry hay that had been protected from the rain. Wade dug in his pocket for matches, found 3. He fired once more to keep the riders back, then ran for the stable. Bullets chased him. One grazed his arm, a line of fire that made him stumble. but he made it inside. The hay was old, dusty, perfect kindling. Wade struck a match. It sputtered and died. He cursed and tried another. This one caught. He touched it to the hay and watched flames spread. Then he ran. Behind him, the fire took hold with a whooshing sound. Smoke billowed into the sky, thick and black. The flames spread to the collapsed building, then to a neighboring structure. Reed's men shouted in alarm. Fire in a frontier town was everyone's problem. If it spread unchecked, it could burn the whole settlement to ash. Wade ran through the chaos, reloading as he moved. He could see Mara in the distance, already a quarter-mile out of town, the mare moving faster than he thought the old horse could manage. A rider cut in front of him. Wade didn't think, just fired from the hip. The man went down. One bullet left. Wade kept running. His lungs burned, his wounded arm throbbed, but he kept moving. Behind him the fire raged, and men shouted about buckets and water pumps. He made it to the edge of town before Reed caught up with him. The older man's horse thundered up alongside Wade, and Reed swung his gun down. Wade dove to the side. The shot missed by inches. Reed wheeled his horse around for another pass. Wade raised the Winchester, aimed, squeezed the trigger. Click. Empty. He'd miscounted. Reed smiled through his pain and exhaustion. Out of bullets, old man? Wade dropped the rifle and drew his revolver, but Reed was faster. His shot hit Wade in the side, a hammer blow that drove the breath from his lungs and sent him to his knees. Reed dismounted slowly, favoring his wounded shoulder. He walked toward Wade, gun raised. "Should have stayed on your mountain," Reed said. "Should have let us have the girl. Now you die for nothing." Wade tried to raise his gun. His hand wouldn't cooperate. Blood was spreading across his shirt, warm and wet. Reed cocked his hammer. "Any last words?" "Yeah." Wade looked up at him, forcing a smile through the pain. "You're not getting that satchel." "We'll see about that." Reed aimed at Wade's head. A shot rang out. Reed jerked, stumbled, looked down at the red stain spreading across his chest. He turned slowly. Mara sat on her horse 30 yards away, Wade's rifle in her hands. She must have circled back when she heard the shooting. Must have picked up the Winchester he'd dropped. Reed tried to raise his gun. Mara fired again. This shot hit Reed in the throat. He went down hard, blood bubbling from his mouth, his good hand clawing at the dirt. Then he stopped moving. Mara rode up to Wade and dismounted. Her face was white, her hands shaking. "You came back," Wade managed. "Of course I came back, you idiot." She knelt beside him, looking at the wound. "How bad?" "Bad?" Wade tried to breathe and couldn't quite manage it. "Might have hit something important." "Don't talk." Mara tore a strip from her dress and pressed it against the wound. Wade gasped at the pressure. "We need to get you to a doctor." "No time. Crow's other men are busy fighting a fire you started." Mara helped him stand. Every movement felt like being shot again. "Can you ride?" "Have to." Getting Wade onto the horse was an ugly, painful process that involved a lot of cursing and at least one moment where Wade was sure he was going to pass out. But eventually, he was in the saddle, slumped forward, holding on through sheer stubbornness. Mara climbed up behind him, one arm around his waist to keep him steady. She kicked the mare into motion. The horse walked, then trotted. The movement sent fresh waves of agony through Wade's side, but he bit down on a scream and held on. Behind them, Miller's Fork burned. Wade drifted in and out of consciousness as they rode. Sometimes he was aware of Mara's arms around him, her voice murmuring encouragement. Sometimes he was back on the mountain, Emily beside him, both of them young and stupid and full of plans. Sometimes he was nowhere at all. When awareness returned, it was dark and they'd stopped. Mara was laying him down on hard ground, covering him with a blanket. "Where?" Wade started. "About 5 miles from Miller's Fork. I found a cave. Small, but it'll keep us hidden." Mara's face appeared above him, lit by dim firelight. "I need to look at your wound." She pulled his shirt open. Wade tried to look down, but couldn't quite manage it. "Talk to me," he said. "Tell me what you see." "Bullet went through. Clean exit. That's good." Mara's voice was steady, but her hands shook as she cleaned the wound with water from their canteen. "Bleeding slowed. I think it missed the important parts." "You think?" "I'm a cook, not a doctor." She tore more fabric from her dress, fashioning it into bandages. "This is going to hurt." It did. Wade bit down on a stick while Mara wrapped his torso tight, pulling the bandages snug to keep pressure on the wound. By the time she finished, Wade was covered in cold sweat and breathing in short, painful gasps. "Done," Mara said softly. She sat back, looking at her bloody hands. "That's all I can do." "It's enough." Wade tried to sit up and failed. "You did good." "I shot a man." Mara's voice was hollow. "I aimed at another human being and pulled the trigger, twice." "You saved my life." "Does that make it okay?" Wade thought about that. "No, it makes it necessary. There's a difference." Mara was quiet for a long time, then, "Will it get easier? The nightmares, the guilt, all of it?" "No," Wade said honestly. "But you learn to carry it." She looked at him, and in the firelight he could see tears on her face. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are. You're stronger than you know." Wade reached out and took her hand. "Listen, whatever happens next, whatever happens to me, you finish this. You take that satchel to Dry River Crossing and you make them listen. You understand?" "Stop talking like you're dying." "Marcia." "I said stop." Her grip on his hand tightened. "You're not dying. You're going to heal, and we're going to deliver this evidence together, and Crow's going to pay for everything he did. That's how this ends. Not with you bleeding out in a cave." Wade wanted to believe her. Wanted to think he was tough enough to survive a gut shot without a doctor. But he'd seen men die from wounds less serious than this. Infection, blood loss, fever. There were a dozen ways this could go wrong. But Mara needed hope, so he gave it to her. "Okay," he said. "Together." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Get some rest. I'll keep watch." Wade closed his eyes, too tired to argue. The pain was a constant throb in his side, but exhaustion pulled him under anyway. He dreamed of fire and falling, and Emily's voice calling his name from somewhere he couldn't reach. The next 3 days were a blur of pain and fever. Wade remembered pieces. Mara giving him water, wiping his face with a damp cloth. The mare's steady gait as they traveled, Mara supporting his weight in the saddle. Rain again, or maybe that was sweat. Voices in the distance that might have been real or might have been hallucination. At some point, he opened his eyes to find himself lying in a real bed, in a room with wooden walls and a ceiling. Clean bandages wrapped his torso. The wound still hurt, but it was a cleaner pain. Manageable. Mara sat in a chair beside the bed, her head tilted back, asleep. She looked terrible, gaunt, exhausted, like she'd aged 10 years in a week. Wade tried to sit up. His side protested but allowed the movement. Progress. The sound woke Mara. Her eyes snapped open and focused on him. "You're awake." She leaned forward. "How do you feel?" "Like I got shot." "That's because you did." She smiled, but it was strained. "You've been in and out for 3 days. Doctor said you were lucky. Another inch to the left and the bullet would have hit your liver." "Where are we?" "Dry River Crossing. We made it." Mara stood up and walked to the window. "Well, I made it. You were barely conscious. But we're here." Wade let that sink in. They'd made it. Against all the odds, all the obstacles, all the men trying to stop them, they'd actually made it. "The evidence?" he asked. "At the Federal Land Office. I delivered it 2 days ago. Handed every document to the territorial investigator and told him everything." Mara turned to face him. "They've already started making arrests. Local officials on Crow's payroll, the land office clerk who changed records, 3 of his hired enforcers. They're building the case against Crow himself." "Where is he?" "They don't know. He disappeared after news of the investigation broke, but they've frozen his assets, seized his properties. He's a fugitive now." Mara smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "He's finished, Wade. Even if he runs for the rest of his life, he'll never have power again." Wade lay back against the pillow, letting relief wash over him. It was done. Elias's evidence had done what it was meant to do. The families who'd been robbed would get justice. The system that had failed them would be forced to make things right. It wasn't a perfect ending. Crow was still alive, still free somewhere. Good people were still dead. Nothing would bring back Elias or the years those families had lost, but it was something. "The families," Wade said. "Have they been told?" "The investigator is reaching out to everyone named in the documents. Some of them don't even know yet that they were robbed. They just thought they'd made bad deals or gotten unlucky. Mara sat back down. But they'll know the truth now. All 43 families. They'll know it wasn't their fault. Your brother would be proud. Mara's smile wavered. I hope so. I hope wherever he is, he knows we finished what he started. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Outside the window, Wade could hear the sounds of a town going about its business. Wagons, voices, dogs barking. Normal life, unaware of how close it had come to continuing under Crow's corruption. What happens now? Wade asked eventually. For you? Doctor says you need to rest for at least 2 weeks. No riding, no heavy lifting, then probably another month of taking it easy. I meant for us. What happens to us? Mara looked at him. I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead. Think about it now. She was quiet for a long moment. I could find work here. Dry River Crossing is big enough to need cooks, or I could move on, find another town. I've gotten good at starting over. Or you could come back to the mountain with me. The words surprised Wade even as he said them. 6 years he'd lived alone on Black Ridge, convinced he was better off that way. And now here he was, asking someone to share that isolation. Mara stared at him. What? You heard me. Come back to the mountain. Stay. Wait, I don't know what to say. Say yes. Say you're tired of running and starting over and working yourself to death for people who don't appreciate it. Say you want a place that's yours, where nobody can run you off or make you feel small. Wade reached for her hand. I'm not asking you to marry me or making promises I can't keep. I'm just saying the cabin's too big for one person, and the work's too much for one person, and maybe we're both tired of being alone. Mara's eyes filled with tears. You really mean that? I don't say things I don't mean. She laughed through her tears. You're half dead in a hospital bed, and you're asking me to move to a mountain with you. That's insane. Probably, but we've already done insane. We rode into the middle of a land fraud scheme and took down a cattle tycoon. Moving to a mountain seems easy by comparison. Mara wiped her eyes, smiling. When you put it that way. So? She looked at him for a long moment, then she squeezed his hand. Ask me again when you can stand up without bleeding, she said. If you still want me then, I'll give you an answer. Fair enough. Wade closed his eyes, suddenly exhausted. The conversation had taken more energy than he'd expected, but he felt lighter somehow, like a weight he'd been carrying for 6 years had finally started to lift. Mara stayed beside him, holding his hand, until he drifted back to sleep. 2 weeks turned into 3 before the doctor finally cleared Wade to leave the hospital. The wound had healed cleaner than anyone expected, though Wade would carry a scar that pulled tight whenever he moved wrong. The doctor said he was lucky, the word everyone kept using, though Wade didn't feel particularly lucky. Lucky would have been not getting shot in the first place. Mara had stayed in Dry River Crossing the entire time, taking a job cooking at the hotel across the street. Wade could see the building from his window, and twice a day Mara would bring him meals that actually tasted like food instead of the gray slop the hospital served. She never brought up his offer about the mountain. Neither did Wade. It hung between them, unspoken, waiting. On the day Wade was released, the territorial investigator came to see him. His name was Mitchell Burke, a thin man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and ink-stained fingers. He carried a leather folder stuffed with papers. Mr. Coulter, Burke said, shaking Wade's hand carefully, I wanted to thank you personally for what you did. Without Miss Bennett's testimony and the evidence you both delivered, we wouldn't have been able to build this case. Wasn't me, Wade said. Was her brother who did the real work. We just finished it. Nevertheless, Burke opened his folder. I thought you'd want to know how things stand. We've arrested 17 people so far. Local officials, land office clerks, 3 of Crow's enforcers. We've recovered documents from Crow's office that corroborate everything in Elias Bennett's records. The case is solid. What about Crow himself? Burke's expression darkened. Still at large. We have warrants issued across 4 territories, federal marshals tracking leads. But so far, nothing. The man has resources and he knows how to disappear. Wade had expected that. Men like Crow always had escape plans. Probably had money stashed in a dozen different towns, contacts who'd help him vanish. What happens to the families? Wade asked. The ones he stole from. We're in the process of returning properties to their rightful owners. It's complicated. Some of the land has been sold multiple times, some families have died or moved on, but we're working through it. Burke pulled out a document. In fact, that's partly why I'm here. There's a man named Thomas Crawford. His ranch was taken 8 years ago. He's been working as a hired hand ever since, barely scraping by. When we contacted him to tell him his land was being returned, he asked if he could meet the people who made it possible. Wade shifted uncomfortably. Not necessary. Perhaps not, but he'd like to thank you anyway, both of you. Burke glanced at the door where Mara had just appeared with Wade's lunch. Miss Bennett, a moment of your time? Mara set the tray down and joined them. Burke explained about Thomas Crawford. He's downstairs now, Burke finished. I know you're both eager to move on with your lives, but it would mean a great deal to him. And frankly, I think it might help you both to see that what you did mattered. Mara looked at Wade. He shrugged. All right, Mara said. Burke left and returned 5 minutes later with an older man who looked like he'd been carved from leather and hard work. Thomas Crawford was maybe 60, with calloused hands and eyes that had seen too much disappointment. He stopped in the doorway, looking at Wade and Mara like he wasn't sure what to say. I don't have fancy words, Crawford said finally, but I wanted you to know what you did. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. My wife died thinking she married a man who lost everything through stupidity. My kids grew up ashamed of their daddy. For 8 years I believed them. Believed I was just too dumb to read a contract right. You weren't, Mara said softly. You were cheated. I know that now. Thanks to your brother. Thanks to you. Crawford pulled an envelope from his pocket. This ain't much. Just some money I saved. But I wanted... We can't take that, Wade said immediately. Please, I need to do something. Need to... Crawford's hand shook as he held out the envelope. I got my land back. I get to go home. That's worth more than money. But I can't just walk away without... Mara stood up and gently pushed the envelope back toward Crawford. Keep it. Use it to fix up your ranch. Buy seed or cattle or whatever you need to start over. That's thanks enough. Crawford's eyes filled with tears. He nodded, unable to speak, and left quickly. Burke gathered his papers. There are 42 more stories like that. 42 families who thought they'd failed when they were actually robbed. You gave them their dignity back. That matters more than catching Crow. After Burke left, Mara and Wade sat in silence for a long time. You think it's enough? Mara asked finally. That Crow gets to run free while those families have to rebuild from nothing? No, Wade said honestly, but it's more than they had yesterday. Sometimes that's all you get. Mara looked at him. You really believe that? That small victories are enough? Wade thought about his 6 years on the mountain. 6 years of telling himself that survival was enough, that not needing anyone was a victory. I used to, he said. Now I think maybe I was just scared to want more. Mara smiled. So what do you want now? Wade met her eyes. I want to go home, and I want you to come with me. You asked me that 3 weeks ago. I know, and you said to ask again when I could stand up without bleeding. Wade pushed himself to his feet. His side pulled, protested, but held. I'm standing. Mara stood too, moving close enough that Wade could smell the kitchen smoke in her hair, the soap she used, the particular scent that meant safety. The mountain's hard, she said. You told me that yourself. Brutal winters, isolation, constant work. It is. And you're not easy to live with. You're stubborn, and you don't talk about your feelings, and you probably haven't cleaned that cabin properly in years. Probably not. And I'm not some perfect frontier wife. I'm loud, and I take up space, and I'll argue with you when I think you're wrong. Good. Mara searched his face. Why me, Wade? You could find someone younger, prettier, easier. I don't want easy, Wade interrupted. I don't want pretty. I want someone who'll ride into danger because it's right. Someone who'll swing a canteen at an armed man and not apologize for it. Someone who's strong enough to be scared and keep moving anyway. He took her hand. I want you, if you'll have me. Mara was quiet for a long moment. Then she squeezed his hand. One condition, she said. Name it. We go visit Elias's grave first. Say goodbye properly. Then we go to the mountain. Wade nodded. Deal. They left Dry River Crossing 2 days later. Wade bought a new horse, a sturdy bay gelding that didn't have his old horse's easy temperament but would do. Mara's old mare had finally given out completely, so Wade bought her a younger mount, a gray with good bones and a calm disposition. The supplies they loaded were different from what they'd carried on the desperate run to Red Mercy. Food, tools, winter provisions, things you bought when you were planning a future instead of just surviving the present. Elias Bennett was buried in a small cemetery outside a town called Copper Ridge, about 2 days' ride north. The grave was marked with a simple wooden cross and a stone someone had carved his name into. Mara knelt beside it for a long time, not crying, just sitting with her brother one last time. Wade hung back, giving her space. When she finally stood up, her face was calm. "I told him we did it," she said. "Told him Crow's empire is gone and the families know the truth. I think he'd be happy about that." "I'm sure he would." "And I told him I was going to stop running, that I found somewhere safe." Mara looked at Wade. "I hope I'm right about that." "Only one way to find out." They rode north, taking their time. No one was chasing them now. No gunmen, no desperate deadlines. Just two people traveling towards something that might be home. They stopped in Ash Hollow to buy supplies Wade couldn't get anywhere else. The town was the same as Wade remembered, small, dusty, suspicious of outsiders. But when Wade walked into the general store, the owner actually smiled. "Coulter, heard you had some excitement down south." News traveled fast in the territories. Wade should have expected that. "Some," Wade said carefully. "Heard you helped take down Victor Crow. That true?" Wade glanced at Mara, who was examining fabric on the far side of the store. "Wasn't just me. Well, whoever did it, folks around here are grateful. Crow had his eyes on land up this way, too. Would have been bad for all of us if he'd gotten a foothold." The owner started pulling down supplies Wade had listed. "Your money's no good here today. Consider it thanks." Wade wanted to argue, but the owner's expression said it wouldn't matter. So he just nodded and accepted the charity. They loaded the supplies and headed up the mountain trail. Wade's new gelding handled the steep climb better than he'd expected. Beside him, Mara rode carefully, her eyes taking in the pine forests and rocky outcroppings. "It's beautiful up here," she said. "Wait until winter. You'll change your mind." "Maybe. Or maybe I'll just appreciate the summer more." The cabin came into view as the sun started to set. Wade had been gone for almost a month, and he'd expected to find the place in shambles. But the chickens were still alive. One of his neighbors must have been feeding them. The cattle were in the high pasture where he'd left them. Even the cabin itself looked intact. Home. Rough and isolated and hard, but home. Wade dismounted and unlocked the door. Inside, everything was covered in dust, but nothing had been disturbed. His bed, the table where he'd eaten alone for 6 years, the fireplace where Mara had cooked that first meal. Mara walked in slowly, looking around. Wade tried to see it through her eyes. The cramped space, the rough furniture, the ladder leading up to the loft, not much to offer someone. "The loft's yours if you want it," Wade said, "same as before. Or I can build you a room off the side of the cabin. Won't be fancy, but it'd give you privacy." Mara set down her saddlebag and walked to the window. The view looked out over the valley, the town of Ash Hollow tiny in the distance, mountains stretching away in every direction. "Build the room," she said. "But not because I need privacy from you, because if we're going to do this, really do this, we need to do it right. Not as employer and cook, as partners." Wade walked up behind her. "Partners. Equal share of the work, equal say in decisions. I cook and clean because I'm good at it, not because it's expected. You handle the heavy labor because you're stronger, not because I'm helpless. We figure out the rest as we go." "Sounds fair." Mara turned to face him. "And if it doesn't work, if we drive each other crazy or realize we're better off alone, we're honest about it. No one gets abandoned. No one gets humiliated. We figure out a solution like adults." "Agreed." Wade held out his hand. "Partners?" Mara shook it. "Partners." They spent the evening settling in. Wade started a fire while Mara unpacked supplies and took stock of what the cabin needed. The list was long: new bedding, curtains, proper storage for food, repairs to the roof. "This is going to take months," Mara said, looking at her notes. "We've got time." They ate a simple dinner of beans and hardtack, sitting on opposite sides of the table like they had that first night. But the silence was different now. Comfortable instead of awkward, full of possibility instead of suspicion. After dinner, Wade pulled out the bottle of whiskey he kept for emergencies and poured 2 cups. To Elias Bennett, Wade said, raising his cup, who started something worth finishing. To Elias, Mara echoed. They drank. The whiskey burned going down, sharp and clean. And to second chances, Wade added quietly. Mara looked at him across the table. To second chances. The first weeks were an adjustment. Wade was used to silence and solitude. Having someone else in the cabin meant noise. Mara humming while she cooked, talking to herself while she worked, asking questions about how things were done. It grated on him sometimes, made him want to snap that he needed quiet. But he didn't, because he remembered 6 years of silence that had felt more like suffocation than peace. Mara was used to moving on before anyone could reject her. Having permanence meant facing her fears, that Wade would change his mind, that she wasn't good enough, that this fragile thing they were building would collapse. But she stayed. Because running was easy and staying was hard, and she was tired of choosing easy. They fought sometimes, over stupid things mostly. How to store the winter vegetables, whether the cattle needed to be moved yet, who'd left the door unlatched so a fox got into the hen house. Their first real fight happened in late September. Wade had ridden down to town for supplies and come back to find Mara had rearranged the cabin. His bed was in a different corner. The table was moved. Even his rifle rack had been relocated. What the hell is this? Wade demanded. The cabin needed better flow, Mara said, not looking up from the stew she was stirring. The old layout was inefficient. It was fine the way it was. It was dark and cramped and made no sense. It's my cabin! Mara set down her spoon and turned to face him. Is it? Because I thought we were partners. Equal say, remember? Equal say doesn't mean you get to change everything without asking. And it doesn't mean everything stays frozen the way you had it when you were too depressed to care. Mara's voice rose. I'm trying to make this place a home, Wade, not a cave you hide in. Wade opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Because she was right. He'd kept the cabin sparse and dark because it matched how he felt inside. Changing it meant admitting he wanted something different now. Fine, he said finally. But ask me next time. Fine. I will. They didn't speak for the rest of the evening. Wade ate his dinner in silence and went to bed angry. The next morning, Mara made his favorite breakfast, biscuits with honey and bacon cooked just right, a peace offering. Wade ate it, then helped her finish moving the furniture the way she wanted it. They didn't apologize, but they didn't need to. Some fights were just about learning how to live with another person again. October brought the first snow. Wade had warned Mara it would come early, but she still stood on the porch that morning staring at the white-covered world with something like wonder. It's beautiful, she said. Wait until it's 6 feet deep and you can't leave the cabin for days. I'll deal with that when it comes. Wade started teaching her the skills she'd need to survive winter, how to read the weather, how to keep the livestock safe in storms, how to ration food when supplies ran low. Mara learned fast, asked good questions, didn't complain when the work was hard. She also started making changes to how things were done. Better ways to preserve food, a more efficient layout for the barn, a system for tracking supplies that kept them from running short. Wade found himself actually listening to her ideas instead of just dismissing them. She was smart, practical. She saw things he'd stopped seeing because he'd been alone too long. In early November, a rancher from down the mountain rode up to ask Wade's help with a property dispute. Wade almost said no. He'd spent 6 years avoiding other people's problems. But Mara was listening, and Wade found himself agreeing to at least look at the situation. The dispute turned out to be simple. The rancher's neighbor had moved a fence line to claim an extra 20 feet of grazing land. Nothing malicious, just opportunism. Wade rode the property line, confirmed the original boundary, and told the neighbor to move his fence back. The neighbor grumbled, but complied. The rancher thanked Wade and offered to pay him. Not necessary, Wade said. I insist. You saved me months of fighting about this. Wade took the money, feeling strange about it. He wasn't a problem solver. He was a hermit who wanted to be left alone. Except apparently he wasn't that anymore. When he got home, Mara was working on the room Wade was building off the side of the cabin. She'd insisted on helping despite Wade's protests, And now she was sanding boards with more enthusiasm than skill. "How'd it go?" she asked. "Fine. Simple fence dispute." Wade set down the money the rancher had paid him. "He insisted on paying." Mara looked at the coins. "That's almost as much as you'd make selling a cow." "It was an hour's work." "Exactly." Mara set down her sandpaper. "Wade, you're good at this. Reading land, settling disputes, being fair. People trust you. I don't want to be the mountain's problem solver." "Why not? You're up here anyway. And people need someone who isn't corrupt or on someone's payroll. Someone who just wants to do right." Wade wanted to argue, but he couldn't quite articulate why the idea bothered him. Maybe because he'd spent so long telling himself he didn't care about people. Admitting he could help them meant admitting he'd been wrong. Over the next few weeks, more people came to Wade with problems. Boundary disputes, questions about water rights, advice on dealing with difficult neighbors. Wade helped when he could, took payment when it was offered, sent people away when their problems were just gossip or feuding. Word spread. The hermit on Black Ridge was fair, honest, and didn't take sides based on who had more money. Wade found himself becoming part of the community he'd spent 6 years avoiding. Winter hit hard in December. The snow came in waves, each storm dumping another foot of white powder that made travel impossible. Wade and Mara were snowed in for days at a time, living on stored food and each other's company. Wade had dreaded this. Dreaded being trapped in close quarters with another person, nowhere to escape. But it wasn't bad. Mara read aloud from books she'd brought from town. Wade taught her to play cards. They cooked together, argued over recipes, laughed when something burned or turned out inedible. They talked about things Wade hadn't discussed with anyone in years. His childhood, his marriage, the grief that had driven him to the mountain. Mara told him about growing up heavy in a world that punished women for not being small and pretty. About cooking in camps where men treated her like furniture. About Elias, who'd been her only real friend. Late one night, sitting by the fire while wind howled outside, Mara asked the question Wade had been expecting. "Do you still love her, your wife?" Wade thought about that. "I'll always love her, but I'm not in love with her anymore. Does that make sense?" "Yeah, it does. What about you? Ever been in love?" Mara laughed bitterly. "Who'd love me? I'm not exactly what men dream about." "That's not what I asked." She was quiet for a long time. "There was someone, years ago, ranch hand who was kind to me, made me feel like I mattered. I thought maybe—" She shook her head. "Turned out he was just being friendly. When I tried to tell him how I felt, he looked horrified, said he liked me, but not like that. It was humiliating. His loss." "Don't." Mara's voice was sharp. "Don't say nice things you don't mean just to make me feel better. I mean it." Wade looked at her across the firelight. "You're brave and smart and stubborn as hell. You rode into danger to finish your brother's work. You saved my life twice. Any man who doesn't see that is an idiot." Mara's eyes filled with tears. "Why are you being nice to me?" "Because you deserve it, and because I'm tired of people thinking they have to be perfect to deserve kindness." She crossed the room and hugged him. Wade stiffened. He wasn't good with physical affection, hadn't been touched tenderly in 6 years. But Mara didn't let go, and slowly Wade's arms came up to hold her back. They stayed like that for a long time, two damaged people finding comfort in not being alone. The new year came quiet and unremarkable. Wade and Mara celebrated with a slightly better dinner than usual and the last of Wade's whiskey. No fireworks, no parties, just two people marking the passage of time. "What do you want this year?" Mara asked as midnight approached. "If you could have anything." Wade thought about that. A year ago, he would have said he wanted to be left alone. Wanted the world to forget he existed. Now, "I want to finish your room," Wade said. "I want the cattle to survive the winter. I want to help at least one more family get back what was stolen from them." "That's it? Nothing for yourself?" "This is for me." Wade gestured around the cabin, at Mara, at the life they were building. "All of it," Mara smiled. "Then I hope you get it." "What about you?" Mara looked into the fire. "I want to stop waiting for everything to fall apart. I want to wake up one day and not feel like I'm one mistake away from being abandoned. I want—" She stopped, then started again. "I want to believe I deserve this. Deserve you, deserve a home, deserve peace." "You do," Wade said quietly. "I know." Up here. She tapped her head. But not here yet. She touched her chest. That takes time. Then we'll take the time. Spring came slowly to Black Ridge. The snow melted in patches, revealing dead grass and muddy ground. The creek swelled with runoff. Animals emerged from wherever they'd hidden during the brutal winter months. Wade's side had healed completely, leaving only a puckered scar and occasional stiffness when the weather changed. Mara's room was finished, a small addition to the cabin with a real door and a window that looked out toward the valley. She'd moved her things into it, but still spent most evenings in the main room with Wade, reading or talking or just sitting in companionable silence. In March, a federal marshal arrived at the cabin. Wade's hand went instinctively to his rifle, but the marshal held up both hands peacefully. "Easy, Coulter. I'm not here for trouble. Name's William Grant. I'm looking for Mara Bennett." Mara came out onto the porch. "I'm Mara." "Ma'am?" Grant tipped at his hat. "I have news about Victor Crow. Thought you'd want to hear it directly." They invited him inside. Grant accepted coffee and warmed his hands by the fire before speaking. "We caught him," Grant said. "Crow. Tried to cross into Mexico with a strongbox full of money and false identity papers. Border Patrol recognized him from our wanted posters." Mara's hand shook, spilling coffee. "He's arrested?" "Arrested, tried, and convicted. Happened fast once we had him in custody. The evidence you provided, combined with the testimonies we gathered, made it open and shut. Judge sentenced him to 20 years hard labor. He'll die in prison." Wade watched Mara process that. Victory, finally. Complete and total. But her face showed something more complicated than triumph. "Will the families get compensation?" she asked. "Money for what they lost?" The court seized Crow's assets. What's left after legal fees will be divided among the victims. It won't make them whole, but it's something. Grant finished his coffee and stood. "I thought you deserved to know. What you did mattered, Miss Bennett. Your brother would be proud." After Grant left, Mara walked outside. Wade gave her a few minutes, then followed. She was standing at the edge of the property, looking down at the valley where the snow was finally melting. "You all right?" Wade asked. "I thought I'd feel different," Mara said. "When it was finally over, I thought I'd feel, I don't know, happy, victorious, something." "What do you feel?" "Tired. Sad that it took so long. Angry that Elias isn't here to see it." She turned to Wade. "Is that wrong?" "No. It's human." Wade stood beside her. "Justice doesn't erase what was lost. It just makes sure the loss counted for something." Mara nodded slowly. "He's really gone. Crow, his empire, his power, all of it, gone." "Yeah. So what now?" Wade took her hand. "Now we live. We fix up the cabin, raise cattle, help people when they need it. We figure out what being happy looks like." "You think we can? Be happy?" "I think we can try." That summer, Mara planted a garden. Wade had never bothered with gardening. Seemed like too much work for not enough return. But Mara was determined. She cleared a patch of ground near the cabin, enriched the soil with compost, and planted vegetables in neat rows. Wade helped dig and haul water, though he grumbled about it. Mara ignored his grumbling and kept working. By July, the garden was thriving. Tomatoes, beans, squash, even some herbs. Mara cooked with fresh ingredients for the first time in months, and Wade had to admit the food tasted better. "Told you it was worth it," Mara said smugly. "Don't get cocky. Winter's coming again." "Let me enjoy summer while it's here." They fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Wade handled the cattle and heavy repairs. Mara cooked and managed supplies and kept the cabin from falling into the bachelor squalor it had been before. They worked together on bigger projects, building a proper chicken coop, fixing the barn roof, clearing new pasture land. People kept coming to Wade for help with disputes and questions. Wade kept helping, kept taking payment when it was offered. The money added up. Not enough to get rich, but enough to improve their lives. One evening in August, Wade and Mara sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. "I got a letter today," Mara said, "from one of the families, the Morrisons. Remember them? The ones whose tax records got changed? Yeah, they wanted me to know they're rebuilding their ranch. They've got their land back and enough compensation to buy seed and livestock. They're starting over. Mara smiled. They named their first calf after Elias. Wade reached over and took her hand. She laced her fingers through his, and they sat there in comfortable silence. Wade? Mara said eventually. Yeah? I think I'm happy. Wade looked at her. Really looked. At the woman who'd ridden up his mountain a year ago, desperate and hunted. Who'd become his partner, his friend. Maybe something more, though neither of them had put a name to it yet. Yeah, he said. Me too. In September, on a day that felt like any other, Wade rode into town for supplies. When he came back, Mara was sitting on the porch with a letter in her hands and tears streaming down her face. Wade's heart dropped. He dismounted quickly, already fearing the worst. What happened? He asked. Mara held up the letter. It's from the territorial government. They're creating an official land claims bureau, a place where people can report fraud or theft or corruption without going through local officials. They're calling it the Bennett Land Commission, after Elias. She laughed through her tears. They're naming it after him, Wade. My brother's going to be remembered, not as the man who drowned in a river, but as the man who exposed a fraud ring and helped create a system to protect people. Wade sat down beside her and put his arm around her shoulders. Mara leaned into him, still crying, but smiling now too. He mattered, she said. Everything he did, everything we did, it mattered. I know, Wade said softly. I know. They sat there until the sun set and the stars came out, two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and built something good anyway. Winter came again, as it always did. But this time, Wade didn't dread it. This time, the cabin was warm and full of life. This time, he wasn't alone. On a cold December night, Wade and Mara sat by the fire, drinking coffee and arguing about whether they should get a dog. We need a dog, Mara insisted, for protection and companionship. We have each other for companionship, and I'm protection enough. You're getting old. A dog would help. I'm 38. That's not old. It's not young either. Wade threw a wadded-up cloth at her. She threw it back, laughing. Later, when the fire had burned down to coals and the conversation had drifted into comfortable silence, Mara said something that made Wade's breath catch. I love you. You know that, right? Wade had known, the way you know things without needing words. But hearing it out loud was different. I know, he said. Then, because she deserved to hear it back, I love you too. Mara smiled, that rare full smile that transformed her whole face. Took you long enough to say it. I'm slow about some things. I noticed. Wade pulled her close, and she fit against him like she'd always belonged there. Maybe she had. Maybe some people were just meant to find each other, even if it took running halfway across a territory and nearly dying in the process. We should get married, Wade said suddenly. Mara pulled back to look at him. What? You heard me. We should get married. Make this official. Wade Coulter, was that a proposal? It was a statement of fact. But if you need it fancy... Wade got down on one knee, wincing as his bad side protested. Mara Bennett, will you marry me? Mara laughed, crying again, pulling him back up. You're supposed to have a ring, you idiot. I'll get you a ring, tomorrow, next week, whenever you want. Just say yes. Yes. She kissed him, quick and clumsy and perfect. Yes, I'll marry you. They got married in March, as soon as the trails were passable. No fancy ceremony. Just Wade and Mara and a circuit judge who rode up from Ash Hollow. A handful of neighbors came. The ranchers Wade had helped, the families who'd gotten their land back, the people who'd learned that the hermit on Black Ridge wasn't so scary after all. Mara wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself. Wade wore clean clothes and looked uncomfortable in them. They exchanged vows standing on the porch of their cabin, with the mountains as witness. When the judge pronounced them married, Wade kissed Mara and felt something settle in his chest. Something that had been broken for 6 years slowly healing. The gathering afterward was modest. Food from everyone who'd attended, music from someone's fiddle, stories and laughter. Wade even smiled, which made several people joke that marriage was already changing him. Late in the evening, when most people had left and only a few stragglers remained, Mara pulled Wade aside. Thank you, she said. For what? For letting me stay. For seeing me when most people looked right through me. For being stubborn enough to ride into danger with me even though you barely knew me. Mara touched his face gently. For giving me a home. You gave me one too, Wade said. I just didn't know I needed it until you showed up. They stood there as the last guests departed, as the sun set behind the mountains, as the first stars appeared overhead. Two people who'd been broken by life and loss, now healing together. It wasn't a perfect ending. There would still be hard winters and difficult days. They'd still fight sometimes, still struggle, still carry the scars of everything they'd been through. But they'd face it together. And that made all the difference. Years later, when people asked Wade Coulter how he'd ended up married to the woman who'd brought down Victor Crow's empire, he'd just smile and say it was a long story. And when they pressed for details, Morrow would add, "It starts with a man who'd forgotten how to hope and a woman who'd forgotten how to stop running. Everything else was just figuring out how to stand still long enough to build something worth keeping." The ranch on Black Ridge thrived. The Bennett Land Commission helped dozens more families recover stolen property. Victor Crow died in prison in his 8th year, unmourned and mostly forgotten. And two people who'd once been alone learned that sometimes the best homes are the ones you build with someone who understands that being broken doesn't mean being worthless. Sometimes it just means you're still fighting, and fighting means you're still alive.